Hey everybody, welcome to the MinistryBuilders.Church podcast. I'm Wayne Lanier. I'm really glad that you've chosen to join us today. We're going to have a great conversation. We're really talking about soul care for pastors and ministry leaders. We're talking mental health awareness today, and so I'm going to get right into it. I'm excited to have my guest today. My friend Josh Turner is joining me today. Josh, good to see you, sir. How are you?
I'm good, buddy. How are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm doing great. Hey, thanks for jumping on. Thanks for jumping on. So, well, you and I, we've been friends and ministry colleagues for a long time, and
Oh,
and
wow.
so, but yeah, well, and hey, and there's not many people that have the cooler office than you have. So, by the way,
I'm just trying to make people think I'm cool when they do Zoom calls with me and stuff. So that's really all it is. And my wife doesn't
okay.
let me put any of my stuff in the house. So
All right.
that's pretty
Okay. Well,
much
hey,
it.
maybe that's a good thing. I don't know. We'll leave it there. We'll leave it right there. So, hey, Josh, as we get started, why don't you just take a minute, introduce yourself, tell
Yeah.
everybody, a little bit about you, what you do, what you're involved in, family, whatever.
Yeah, so I do a number of different things, which is super weird because, like Wayne said, Wayne and I worked together for a number of years, been through the trenches together in ministry. And so now I am an executive pastor at a church in Los Alamitos, California, right in Orange County. I'm basically helping them build a network called the Kingdom Collective. I'm on staff at Southeastern University, running something called the Center for Sustainable Ministries, also doing my doctorate. So take that, Florida State University. I help with I help with ARC with Pastor Dino some, but really probably one of the main things I do is I run an organization called the 1010 Project. I have a son that is about to be 21 years old. He is about to be a senior at Kennesaw State University studying psychiatry. So we like to play a game right now at home called Diagnose Dad, where he just like reads a textbook and tells me what he thinks is wrong with me. And I told him I have enough counselors to do that. And then I have a daughter who is about to be 16. She is special needs. She is the 12th known case in the world of a rare genetic disorder. And I have an amazing wife named Becca who pretty much keeps me out of as much trouble as she can and keeps our house running and really is an amazing woman. So that's what I do. And it's fun. It's a lot of different things, but it's a lot of fun.
That's great. That's great. And by the way, let me just hats off to Becca because she seems to do a great job. She seems to do a
as my
great job. So hats
as
off to Becca.
my buddy describes Becca as very resilient being
That's
married to
right.
me.
That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right. And with all the things that you're involved in and all the things of ministry, we all have to be pretty resilient. So
For
and
sure.
maybe that's a good kind of lead in to our conversation today,
It
about
is.
being resilient because we really want to talk about today. Um, I guess I kind of classify it as how do we care for our own souls, right?
Yeah.
And you know, bringing some real awareness around the issues of mental health and emotional well-being and that sort of thing. So
Yep.
why don't we let's jump into this. Tell me a little bit about what exactly you're doing with the 1010 project because I think that'll kind of lead us into this conversation.
Yeah, yeah. So we started 1010 almost 4 years ago. The name comes from Ecclesiastes 1010. The paraphrase that I always use is a dull axe requires more work, so use wisdom to sharpen the blade. For years I had gone on, 4 to 5 day trips, which are really great, right? Hunting, fishing, just being with other pastors, and those are really, really good. But on one of the trips I had taken, and I was actually leading at a thing called Young Guns that I lead with a guy named Brad Lomenick. And I was walking toward the bathroom, and there was a buddy of mine, and he was like just standing by the bathroom, and he was sobbing. And as a pastor, there's always that kind of that moment where you're like, hey, do I need to check on this guy, or is he just having a moment with the Lord? And what I realized was I needed to check on this guy. So I walked up to him and I said, hey, man, are you okay? Everything going all right? And he said, yeah, here's my question to you now. Now what? He said, you've brought us up here to Colorado to ride horses, talk about staying healthy in ministry. It's 3 days. Now I realize there's some things inside of me that's not super healthy. So now what do I do? And really, 1010 also comes out of a place of I had a friend in 2020 take his life that was in ministry, and it was super shocking. Talked to him the morning of, talked to him about every day. And John Eldridge, who I tell everybody is like my spirit animal, in one of his books, he says there's a difference between relief and restoration. And so one of the things that we started looking at is, what does it look like to really have pastors be restored? I'm not talking about restored from a failure, or restored from, making a poor choice or whatever. I'm talking about in their soul, in their emotions, in their relationship. So what 1010 is, it is a year-long process that we take pastors through. We call it prehab instead of rehab. We want to get them before, they kind of burn out or go off the rails or whatever the case may be. And so it's a year-long process that focuses on spiritual, relational, and emotional health. And so we do that through 3 adventure trips. One of the trips being, the middle trip always being, a counseling intensive. So we have 4 to 5 therapists that work with us, and we fly in, we go to a retreat center, and these pastors go through an intense therapy session for 4 to 5 days. We do mental health assessments. We do leadership assessments. We will take 24 guys snowmobiling in February in Jackson Hole. And really the whole reason we do that is because we want guys to build relationships with one another. And when you have a shared experience, it becomes about that relationship as opposed to what that person does. And so it's really just this process we take guys through to help them grow relationally with one another, to grow emotionally healthy through counseling, assessments. We have a doctor that works with us that was educated at Oxford and Cambridge and ran the spiritual formation department at Westminster. And then we have some leadership assessments. And then we just also have fun. And there's a doctor that I was actually teaching one of my doctoral classes, and he calls it holy leisure. And so we do some things that have holy leisure to help guys have fun in safe environments.
Wow.
So that's what we do. Yeah.
So how long have you guys been doing this with 1010? When did this start?
Yeah. So we put this together in 2020. Me and my business partner, Tyler Reagan, we were sitting 6 feet apart in his driveway during COVID, dreaming up what would it look like to take pastors through a process. And, back to Eldridge's thing, relief is good, right? Like at times, all of us need relief. We need to get away. We need to do something, a holy leisure that's fun. But what I've learned in my life is, like, when I get unhealthy or when I start getting burned out, I sometimes will go to things that are not holy leisure, that are not always healthy, or not always, let's just be honest, not sinful at times.
Mhm.
And so we really started looking at, man, what are some things that we can do to help cultivate some of those things? So really in 2020, February, the end of February, will be 4 years since we took our first trip with guys. And so we've put
That's great.
almost 100 guys through now.
That's fantastic. Fantastic. What have you found helps leaders, and particularly let's focus on ministry leaders.
Yeah.
What seems to help them, if you will, raise their hand to say, I probably should talk to someone. I probably should explore this.
Yeah.
What is helping them? Because I've found in my experience over a lot of years is that just getting to that conversation is
For
often the
sure.
hardest part. So what
Yep.
are you finding that's helping pastors and leaders to raise their hand and even just step up to say,
hmm
this is probably a good idea for me?
Yeah, I think there's a few different things. One of them is I don't think there is much of a stigma around mental health now in the church world as there used to be. Right? Like, I think as pastors, one of the things that we're taught to, like, what I like to call act in. Don't let anybody see you sweat. You got to have it all together. You got to be healthy. You can't lead somebody through something you haven't been through, like all these things. And so we're taught to act in. And then sometimes we're taught by people, hey, you can't have friends in ministry. Right. And I think that there's a lot of people and a lot of guys that are my contemporaries or younger that are saying, I don't think it's supposed to be this way. So first of all, I think that the language and the conversation around mental health in the church world has changed, and it doesn't mean you have lack of faith if you need help, right? Like, you can love Jesus with everything in you and struggle with depression, loneliness, anxiety, all these sort of things. The other thing is guys, and this is just sometimes they want to have fun. So I tell everybody, man, I am baiting you in with snowmobiling and UTVs and pheasant hunts and golf so that it will help you have transparent conversations with people. And so it's really this kind of like give and take of I understand guys want to do cool things that make them feel adventurous, that has a little bit of danger in it in a healthy setting, but also I understand that I'm using that just to be able to help them be able to have conversations. And then the other thing, and I think this is the main thing that we've learned too, is one of our phrases for 1010 is we give pastors a safe place to say dangerous things.
Mhm.
Most pastors, and this was my case, most pastors, everybody in your world either works for you or goes to your church, or you have a board, right? Or overseers. So there's always this fear of, okay, the people that work for me, they've got to respect me, so I can't be vulnerable with somebody. The people that go to my church, I need them to see me as as their pastor, so I kind of have to look like I have it all together at times. And then board, overseers, whatever, however your trustees, however you're shaped in that, there's always this fear too of like, man, if I'm really struggling with something like every man struggles with and woman, and I go to them, I could potentially lose everything. I could be removed. I could be whatever. Like I'm dealing with a situation right now with a guy in Georgia that he got some guys on his board that just for whatever reason, man, they don't like him. And he had been vulnerable with them in the past. He has teenage kids, older kids that have made some poor choices. So now they're coming to him saying, hey, your 21-year-old kid is making bad choices, so that makes you unfit to be a pastor. And they removed him.
Wow.
And so that's the sort of stuff that I think that we get ingrained in. So I think that there's a lot of different things that help that conversation kind of move forward when it comes to pastoral health.
That's fantastic. Josh, what you told the story, about being on that, being at that retreat and
Mm-hmm.
the guy in the hallway, but you know, what there's drivers in our life, right? And now you've been a pastor for a long time. What did you find personally? Because I like for me, I think it took a long time for me to even admit that first of all, I was just worn out emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
Like just admitting that I was worn out emotionally was probably it was the first thing that allowed me, and for me it gave me permission to
Yeah.
say I I should start having a conversation with somebody
Yeah. I
about
may need to
this,
talk to somebody.
right?
Yeah.
Like for me, how I recognized it, I noticed like I would be sitting, Josh, I would be sitting in a church service. There's some other person's preaching, right? And I'm listening to this guy, this person, they're preaching, and I'm getting angry. I'm listening to them going, if I hear another preacher say blank, right? And in
Yeah,
my
yeah,
mind,
yeah.
it was like a church slogan, right? And so
Oh, yeah.
and I thought, if I hear another person, I'm just going to run out of the room. And I thought, and I was to the point where if I wasn't the person on the stage, I like didn't want to be in the room.
Oh, dude, for sure. For
And for
sure.
me, it was I well, first of all, thankfully, I started to realize I don't think that's probably not healthy. It's
Yeah.
probably not positive.
Something
And
in the basement down there.
yeah, and so
Yeah.
so I began to explore and ask myself what's going on, and it was through that it made me look at my life. In my case,
Mm-hmm.
my wife had been through cancer. We had just on and on the
Yep.
list and adopted kids and stuff that we were dealing with, and it was
Mm-hmm.
like all of a sudden it was like, of course you're worn out.
Yeah.
Of course your brain is fried and you can't think. Like,
Yeah.
of course. And it was from that I started to get with some trusted people
Yeah.
and just to start talking about it first of all
Yeah.
was a huge deal. So what has that been like for you? Because I know you like me, we've been on some journeys that have been up and down and sideways and in
Yep.
and out, right? And I know that you probably dealt with some of the same things. So talk
Oh
about that
yeah.
for a moment, if you would.
Yeah, I think so I've done counseling and been in counseling. When I say done counseling, I've been in counseling now for almost 16 years. And it first started with when we had our special needs daughter. And so I'll never forget, I used to be able to go preach over in the UK quite a bit. And I was walking through downtown London with like two of my best friends, and it hit me that my wife was at home taking care of our kids while I'm out gallivanting the streets of London, right? And it just hit me in this moment. I go, holy cow, like I would resent me if I was her. And so that started Becca and I going to counseling together just as a preemptive, like, hey, if we don't pay attention to this, this could go sideways in our marriage, because having the special needs kids, as you know, Wayne, is a journey. And so then when you start meeting with a counselor enough, you realize you have some issues, right? And so I think I started realizing, like, as I met with counselors, that, like, man, there's a lot of things inside of me that are probably not the healthiest. And then I am your typical type A driver. If you do the Enneagram, I am a hardcore three. Also, like, it was weird when we did, I was like a 3/8, depending on who I was dealing with at the time. And so I started realizing, man, like I have some very unhealthy tendencies. And I realized, man, I had a really unhealthy view of God. God to me was, the harder I worked for him and the better I did, the more he loved me. Now, I know that's not biblically true, but that was what was in me, and that drove a lot of things inside of me. And so the harder that I could work for him, the more that I could do for him, the better my quiet times were, prayer life was, like whatever it was, the more that I felt like the Lord loved me. And like you, I think it's just the grace of God that I was like, man, I think I need to deal with this with somebody. And then, man, there's just been a few situations in life, man, where I've walked through some super, super significant, painful times in life. And one of them, you actually walked with me through it, Wayne. Like, I remember sitting with my counselor the week that this situation happened, and my counselor looked at me and he said, "Hey, man, you are actually in trauma right now." And he goes, your tendency as a pastor is going to be to pray your way through this, to read your Bible all the time. He said, yes, do that. I'm not telling you not to do that. He goes, but you have to walk through this like a trauma, and you have to walk through this like the loss of a child. And it's kind of like what you said. It gave me this permission to not be okay
Mhm.
and not feel like I had a lack of faith or God wasn't good or whatever. It's just, life is hard and things happen. And sometimes you need a third party or a second party to help you process what you're walking through. And then even for me, I'll even go and say, like, I had to go on anti-anxiety medicine for 2 years after that situation, because I was so keyed up that I couldn't even think clearly
Mhm.
on normal things, because I was already so ramped up, anxiety, depression wise, all that sort of stuff. So it's just been a few things where I looked at and I recognized things that were going inside of me, and realized these aren't going to go away on their own, you know?
Yeah, yeah. That's so true. Just being able to be honest. I came up
Mm-hmm.
with I probably didn't make this phrase up, and maybe it didn't. It may
We'll,
be
we'll
totally
give
not
it to
make
you.
sense to anybody else, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but to me, this statement just helped me a lot. Like, I started saying to myself, having a problem is not really a problem. Like, everybody has them, right? So,
Yep.
so I finally I had to come to a place where the fact that I was dealing with something, the fact that I was depressed, the fact
Mm-hmm.
that I was emotionally worn out,
Yep.
the fact that I needed to work through this with other people was not the problem. Like,
Yeah.
that didn't pile on.
Yeah.
In the past, uh, like you said, thankfully the conversation has changed in the church world.
Yep.
But,
Yep.
and I'm like 38 years into this, right? So a lot of
Mm-hmm.
years ago, you couldn't talk about these things.
Yeah.
It was seen as a lack of faith. It was seen as you're not spiritual enough. It was seen as that's not real. I've
Yeah.
heard this more than once from pastors. Those things are not really real. And I thought,
Yeah.
no, your emotions are very real. Like they're very
Yeah.
real.
Yo, for sure.
And they're not good tests for what really is,
No, they're
but they
terrible.
impact you in a lot of ways. And so
Yeah.
what have you
It's
found
the
has
phrase.
really helped? Go ahead, I'm
It's,
sorry.
it's the phrase that emotions are good indicators, they're terrible dictators,
Yeah, that's right.
right?
That's right.
Like it's just part of it.
That's
So
right. That's right. What are you what are you finding is helping these pastors to be able to? You told a story a moment ago about the guy with the board and all the
mhm,
things with his kids and all of that. So sometimes for some leaders, because of the scenario they're in, they really don't feel like they can come out and say, "Oh yeah, by the way, I'm
for
going to
sure.
this thing and I'm going to get
Yeah.
counseling and I'm going to go through." Like, how are what are some ways we can help leaders give themselves permission, or how can they talk about this in a way that doesn't jeopardize their situation?
Yeah, I think one of the things I've been working on, I actually worked on this all last week and kind of was able to figure out a formula, which is weird. So I started asking the question because here's what I'll never forget this. My dad said this once. So the church I grew up at, I remember my pastor took a sabbatical that he was my youth pastor and all that. And I remember my dad one time saying, I've worked for the railroad for 40 years and I've never taken a sabbatical. And I was like, well, it's a little bit different, but business people at times, they don't understand that. And a lot of boards are made up of business people within the church world. So one of the things I started asking myself the question of is, man, what is the cost if a pastor leaves or falls morally? So this past week, I started calling some staffing firms. I started calling some churches that have had pastor changes. Some of them were good pastor changes. Some of them were horrendous pastor changes. And what I was trying to figure out was, okay, what is the attrition, of when a pastor leaves? What is the average per person giving a year on through America? And then what do staffing firms charge if they have to use a staffing firm? So really the number that you look at and that you find is really anywhere from 20 to 50% attrition when pastors leave a church. So there are some that are 10%, there are some that are in the 60s. Those are obviously very bad scenarios when you hit 60s, 50s, all that sort of stuff. So we started looking at, okay, let's say that there's a pastor that has a church of 1,800 people and the pastor makes, X amount of dollars a year and he has a moral failure. Let's just say at the lowest percentage that I have seen by interviewing other people, that 20% of the church leaves. Well, when you look at per person giving on the average through America to churches, yearly per person giving is around $2,200. So you take 20% of 1,800 people and then you times that by $2,200, you're looking at the loss of a pastor is somewhere around the $300,000 to $400,000 mark. And then if you add on top of that a recruiting firm because they can't find a pastor, what will happen is a staffing firm will usually come in and charge 1/3 of the first year salary of that pastor plus another $40,000 to $50,000 on top of it. So you're getting to numbers that are significantly more than making sure your pastor stays healthy. So when it comes to board talk, that's the way that we have started kind of talking to boards saying, hey, listen, we're asking you to invest in your pastor for this amount of money. But if you don't, and something were to happen to him, burnout, moral failure, he moves on, this is ultimately what it could end up costing your church financially, which is a very large number. The other side of it, man, is if a pastor does not want to talk about hey, I'm going to go do this thing all about soul care. One of the things that we do with 1010 too is leadership training. So my business partner, Tyler Reagan, is a consultant. He has written 2 leadership books. One of them was mentioned in Forbes, which is pretty incredible. And so we can say, hey man, you're also doing leadership training. We're going to teach you how to be a better leader, which we all know matters with soul care. And then, some pastors, they just say, hey, I need to go have fun and I'm going to go snowmobiling, or I'm going to go hunt pheasants, or I'm going to go fly fishing, or so it's really, we kind of give the pastor all the tools that he needs to be able to go to his board, and also, unfortunately, I could actually send you this if you want, Wayne, but I had this stat sheet from Barna, from Pew Research, from all these different things on the amount of pastors. I think it's 85% of pastors say that ministry has had a negative effect on their family. 40% of pastors right now say that if they could do something else and make the same money they make now, they would go do that. So some of it is just looking at black and white numbers and saying, maybe your pastor is super healthy. And that's the goal, right? Maybe he is doing great and he is super healthy. But if we want to keep him there, then man, let's be proactive in this. And that's why we say that 1010 is prehab, because we don't want people thinking, hey, we're in the hospital doing triage. We want to be your general practitioner doctor, making sure that everything's going all right, every year, so to speak.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, well, I'll be sure to get those documents from Josh, and I'll have links to his sites and all of the things. We'll have that down in the show notes. Make that available to everybody. Josh, what have you found? What's been some of the most rewarding things? You see a lot of people now. Thankfully, 1010 is thriving, and pastors and leaders are starting to see what's happening and see the benefit of it. Especially the younger ones really are.
Yeah.
So just give us some of the good stories. Give me 1 or 2 good stories of kind of the positive impact.
Man, you never know when you put a trip together, right? Like, because it's guys from all different walks, and we're not up under a denomination. So we'll have Southern Baptist, Charismatic, Assembly of God, non-denomination. I mean, we'll have everybody. And kind of when you're always putting a group together, there's always this prayer. You're like, God, I hope these guys, I hope they get along well and everything. It doesn't turn into some weird theological debate. When you give guys a safe place to talk, and no one works for them, nobody goes to their church, and nobody's on their board, it is amazing to me how these guys open up. It's like, I don't know if they come ready for it or they're expecting it. I just took a group of guys in October, and there was one guy in particular that told his story, and it was a rough story. From stuff from his past, the way he grew up, and you could tell like he was really, really, really nervous about it, and to the point where he had told his story in the past to people who had then treated him differently because of his past and his story and his struggles. And we were sitting around a fire pit. We were up in Nebraska going pheasant hunting the next day. We had just driven UTVs that day, and I'll never forget, I was like, all right, who wants to go? And this guy sat up, he goes, I want to go because I got to sleep tonight. Because he was so nervous about telling this story that he was having trouble sleeping on the trip. So he tells his story, and at the end of it, he said this phrase, he goes, I'll understand if you guys treat me different now. And I remember looking at him, and I just went, hey man, we don't care. Like, we don't care like that. I've got stories. Like, I know that people look at me and think, oh, you have just always been so holy in your life. But this beard, Wayne, tells a different story. You know what I mean? But he was so used to people judging him as a pastor and treating him differently. He'd been bottling all this stuff up inside. And I just remember him the rest of the trip and how free he felt. And then there was another guy actually on the same trip that the last night he and I were standing up on top of this hallway about to go to sleep, and he said, hey man, he goes, everything that we did on this trip is nothing I do. Like we went pheasant hunting, he wouldn't even take a gun. Like, he just walked around. You know what I mean? I was like, listen, if the shooting starts, just hit the deck. Like, I was just like, be careful. And And so he and I were standing at the top of the stairs on this hallway, and he looked at me and said, I was so nervous about coming. He said, I had my pastor pray for me that there would be one moment that I would realize why I was here. He said, dude, I want you to know there's been dozens of moments that I knew I was here for a reason. And so I think that's always the thing for me is seeing guys when you put them in the right setting, how they open up and how much they need it. And then also, we do the counseling intensive at 6 months in after these guys have been in relationships, have been doing monthly Zoom calls every week or every month. And there have been so many times in the counseling. I go through it every year with them. I always need tune-ups, you know what I mean? And so the last one I did was with one of my best friends, and seeing him walk through pains, hurts, disappointments, and be vulnerable, but not just vulnerable to a counselor, vulnerable in a group of men, and watching all those men rally to him and lay hands on him and speak life into him and pray for him. I think those are the moments where you're like, holy cow, man, we really heard from the Lord starting this thing. Because there's always, when you start something, you're like, I mean, I think this is God. I think this is what he's calling me to. And then the first 10:10 we ever did, man, it was just like this really beautiful moment. We did the counseling piece. We were actually out in California doing the counseling piece at this time. And one of our buddies was a worship leader in San Diego, and he came out and he did worship that last night for us with all the guys. And hearing a group of 28 guys worship and sing after they had been through a week of intense therapy, I just remember looking at my business partner, Tyler, and going, hey, dude, we really heard from God. Like, this is a really amazing thing. We have one guy, he's actually here in Atlanta, and his wife actually reached out to us afterwards and said, I don't know what y'all did to my husband, but he has come back a different person. And those are the things that you're like, okay, we're not just helping guys, because our goal isn't just to help a guy be a better pastor. Our goal is to help a guy be a better husband, a father, a friend, a pastor, a leader. And so that's why we really tried to take this holistic approach. Like, we have a partnership with WindShape through Chick-fil-A, and our partnership with Chick-fil-A, that if a pastor needs marriage counseling, Chick-fil-A will step in and help cover it for them. Because we're really trying to not just affect the pastor, but his whole family, his church, and everything. And so those have been like some of my favorite stories so far.
Wonderful, wonderful. Josh, take a minute as we kind of wrap up our conversation. Take a minute and talk to those leaders for a second, and because I think some of them, there's some people that are watching or listening to this that really just need permission. I think they need to hear. And so talk to them for just a moment, if you would.
Yeah, I mean, I would say to everybody in ministry, ministry is hard. It is weirdly the most rewarding and the most difficult thing that I've ever done in my life. And you have been called by God. He has anointed you and equipped you to do what God is calling you to. But I think that there's times that you need, it's like Moses, like, you can't go it alone. You can't do it by yourself. You are not the man that goes to the mountaintop and hears from the Lord and comes down and tells all the people. Like, there is a way that God has called us to do ministry. And, I always tell people, when Jesus says his yoke is easy and his burden is light, I sometimes look at pastors and say, if that's the case, then what are we doing wrong? And listen, I know the struggles of it. I've been a pastor for 20 years. I'm still pastoring. I know the things that I still have to work through, the things I still have to fight through. And I think it's okay to not always be okay. And we've heard this, but it's not okay to stay there. And so one of the things that I'd love to do, if you would give me permission, and 10:10 is to help you be successful in ministry, be successful in your home, be successful as a husband, as a father, and a pastor, and really surround you with some like-minded guys who are on the same journey as you are. One of the things I've learned is so many pastors, when we isolate ourselves, we feel like what we're going through is unique. And when you feel like what you're going through is unique, it can make you feel crazy, like you're the only person that's experienced this. But I can promise you, as much work as I've done with pastors now, the majority of us all have the same struggles. And sitting in a room with men who love you, care for you, are on the same journey, and allowing each other to speak into one another, um, there's something that the Lord does in that I fully don't understand, but I've learned to become okay with the mysteries of the Lord. And so I just would encourage you. I would encourage you not to stay where you're at, to reach out, to ask for help. Man, maybe you just need to have some fun. It's okay to have fun. And let me just say this to you: studying your Bible and preparing sermons is not your hobby. Every pastor needs a hobby. There's a story of a good friend of mine who's a pastor. He's been a pastor for 40 years, transitioned his church to his son. He was playing golf with Oral Roberts, and he asked Oral Roberts, he said, "What has kept you in ministry?" And Oral Roberts told him, he said, "Golf saved my life." And so there are things that we need, guys, that do not come from the day to day that we do in the church world. And we just want to help you. And I want you to know that if you feel that way, you're not crazy that you feel that way. So we're here to help.
It's good to know. Very good to know. Josh, thanks for sharing that. It's been an honor
You
and a
bet, buddy.
privilege. Hope to do this again. Hey, listen, everybody, you need to share this with somebody you care about. You need to share this conversation with a pastor, a ministry leader, just somebody that you love, that you think this will help. So until the next time, be sure to like, subscribe, share this. We'll talk to you again soon.